So, William, in our own training, you and I are both big fans of what people might call cross-training, using quite a variety of different training methods, and this is something that we tend to recommend to a lot of our clients. But for your point, from your point of view, what do you see as the main benefits to including cross-training in a program?
Well, number one, variety.
Mm-hmm.
It's very interesting doing it. You're not only doing running. That's number one. Number two, running's got a bad image as being a sport where people get injured a lot.
Yeah.
Touch wood, I haven't had a running injury for over 10 years now.
Sure.
However, most people do get injured running, and quite frequently.
Yeah.
So if you do have a running injury, doing cross training can be a very good way of giving the injury time to heal.
Sure.
Perhaps doing supportive training
Yeah.
during that time, giving you something to do literally whilst you're recovering.
Yeah.
And rather than starting looking at cross training and actually doing it when you've actually got an injury,
Yeah.
it makes a lot of sense to actually include some cross training when you're not injured,
Sure.
so that you're familiar with alternative activities, just as part of your general training. So that's number two.
Yeah.
Number three, running it's not a whole body exercise.
Sure.
It's a very, very specific exercise, very, very specific range of motion and movement in all your joints and tendons and everything else.
Yeah.
So by including cross training,
Yeah.
you're having a much more broad base to your physical conditioning.
Yeah.
It gives you I'm much more of a generally fit, fitter, healthier, because I'm doing a whole wide range of training, not just running.
Yeah.
And the longer the event you're doing, the more sort of general conditioning, strengthening becomes important, because you don't want to break down in a race with overuse injuries.
Yeah.
And then thereby spoiling your race performance.
Mm.
And the fact that I've never broken down even in a 1,000-mile race
Yeah.
must indicate I'm doing something right.
Yes.
And I like to think that it's the cross training and strengthening is making me a fitter, sort of more totally fit. I tend to call it total fitness.
Yes.
It's this general all-round fitness program, which is then supporting this exceptionally long-distance running that I'm doing.
Well, I agree with you. I mean, I think one of the things about a term like cross-training is it's quite loose, and the term like cross-training might for one person mean time on an exercise bike, and another person might be weights, another one stretching, and so on. But these things can cover quite a lot of things. I mean, you mentioned about the relatively bad reputation running has in terms of injury rates. I seem to remember reading, I think it was a 2002 study in the US where there'd been a really quite mammoth study looking at injury rates by looking at the number of people taken to emergency rooms and the number of doctors' reports and days off work. And I think it came out that despite people's fears and concerns about the apparent dangers of lifting things like heavy weights and stuff, you were about 6 times more likely to be running injured than injured lifting weights of any kind. But you raised the issue of like sort of overuse injuries, for example, like because you're running for so long, or also the exhaustion aspects. I think one of the things that cross training can allow you to do, like for example, let's pick weights for a moment, is that, as you say, ultra running requires repetitive motion within a small range.
Yeah.
And it requires you to keep doing it for a long time. But each stride, for example, doesn't really require you to use a huge amount of force per stride.
No.
It's the sum of the total effort. But of course, if you use other forms of cross-training, let's say weights or something, then you increase your maximal output. You've got a greater muscular force available. So, of course, each stride feels easier.
That's it, yes.
Which is...
It's a very, very short but very, very intense form of training if you're lifting a heavy weight, for example.
Yeah.
But then it makes the running equivalent, the one stride, feel incredibly easy.
Yes.
And I've always said, people have often said to me, why do I spend so much time cross-training, including weights and all the rest of it?
Yeah.
Well, it's very simple. It makes the running feel easier.
Yeah.
I'll go with that any day. And my race performances have demonstrated that.
Yeah. So although we often joke about, oh right, you're after a race for a bit of a rest from the training.
Yeah.
That is a joke. That said, usually when you're running around for an hour, you actually feel like you're doing less work than.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, running an hour doesn't feel like anything at all.
Yeah.
If I'm doing my hardest cross training, which for me would be the weights, when you're doing that, it's incredibly hard and intense and draining.
Yeah.
And yes, it does. The combined effect of all the different types of cross training I'm doing, combined with the highly intensive running sessions and the weight vest running, that sort of thing, makes race pace running feel very, very easy.
Sure. I mean, one of the other aspects I find useful when we're devising training programs for people with cross training is the ability to use cross training to alternate between high and low impact sessions.
Yeah.
So if, let's say, somebody was going out doing hill running or up or downhill, or maybe running with a weights vest on, or they're really sprinting or something, all of these things are pretty high impact quite often, and sometimes the body just needs a break from that kind of high impact training.
Yes. Well, to allow recovery.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And otherwise, that's when you do start risking overuse injuries and things. You've allowed insufficient recovery. But very often, it doesn't mean that the person couldn't train the next day.
No.
It just means they need a change.
Yeah. And in fact, I don't actually, the term people talk about glibly about overtraining.
Yeah.
I actually think it's actually very, very difficult to overtrain.
Yeah.
It's not the overtraining, it's the under recovery.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I can train exceptionally hard over 2 or 3 days. I mean, even a race, you could say, is the most incredible training session, isn't it?
Yeah.
Or running 1,000 miles is an incredible training session. All right, we're calling it a race.
Yeah.
But it's the recovery afterwards, and with any training session, the results of that training occur during the recovery.
Absolutely.
So people who are so-called overtrained really is an accumulation of under-recovery. They've gone on for weeks and sometimes months of training hard and they're never really recovering properly.
Yeah.
And then they're becoming unhealthy. Because if you're not healthy, you can't train properly.
I agree with you. I mean, I think unless you're in some truly bizarre situation, like literally having a gun to your head or something on those lines where, the brain overrides all other safety considerations, I mean, it's extremely difficult to actually push your body harder than it can cope with.
No, yes.
Yeah,
because the brain won't allow it.
Exactly. On the other hand, it's not anywhere near as difficult to get up and try and repeat it the next day, even though you shouldn't.
Yeah, I mean, the brain is monitoring your activity all the time.
Yeah. And
when you're training really hard, the brain will not allow you to kill yourself.
Exactly.
But the brain does not stop you under recovering.
Exactly.
Because you're making a conscious decision on that.
Yeah.
And you're deciding, right, I'm going to go and train hard tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. And I say the brain's really only monitoring what you're doing during the actual exercise from the point of view of not allowing you to kill yourself.
Yeah.
Or your heart to explode or whatever.
Yes.
But it's not, in the same way, it's not monitoring how you're recovering.
That's
and
right.
if you're making a decision to ignore feelings of fatigue and or excessive fatigue, pains, injuries, that sort of thing, and you can consciously override those signals.
Or as so many people often do, just pop a few painkillers so you don't notice the effects so much.
They're just masking what the body is telling them by, as you say, by over-the-counter painkillers.
Yeah.
Then it leads to a spiral of under recovery, which then is described as overtraining.
Yeah.
And then very seriously ill health,
Absolutely.
which can take months, even years to recover from.
Sure. But getting back to some of the benefits of cross training, I mean, we've kind of touched on this already. One of the reasons why I like to encourage people to have at least one cross training session of some sort or another, maybe some cardiovascular type cross training session each week, is partly so that they're in the habit of using this method, so that if, for example, as you say, let's say they're a runner, they've got an injury, well, it's not the time you want to start learning to use an elliptical trainer or an exercise bike or something or other. It's always good to have it there. But as I say, there's the injury aspect, and there's also the switching between high and low impact aspect. But one of the things that I think people don't always grasp is that even, let's say, you are out of running with an injury, it doesn't mean that you have to lie on the sofa all day long and do no training. You can always train some part of the body that isn't affected by the injury.
Oh, definitely. I mean, one of the main comments you get, the feedback you get, is people come into running.
Yeah.
Not surprisingly, because they like running.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
They don't come in because they like weightlifting, weight training, doing plyometrics, flexibility, all the rest of it.
Yeah.
And that can be a weakness in their approach, because it's not the healthiest of things only having one single activity you want to do.
Sure.
But I personally, I'm very lucky in a way, because I came into running from a different sport.
Yeah.
Table tennis, I've been international standard. I've done a whole variety of training
Yeah.
for table tennis, including running, all kinds of mobility work, all the rest of it, which to me was all part of the package. So that when I came into running, I looked at it very differently, if you like, for a typical runner, typical club runner. When I didn't bat an eyelid when I thought, I just thought of it myself to start doing
Yeah.
all kinds of what we now call cross training, alternative training, including weights, mobility. To me that was fine. I enjoyed. I'm lucky because I enjoyed all different types of training,
Yeah.
and to me it was all part of the package that would lead to a better William and a better performing William,
Sure.
and a William that would produce better race results, which is what I was interested in.
Yeah.
So to me it's all been. I've never been involved in a sport before where so many people only thought of doing that sport only.
Yeah.
No, to me it was, you did a whole lot of other activities
Yeah.
to produce better performances at your chosen sport.
Yes, yes, absolutely. I think, ironically, in some ways, that's the normal attitude in most sports, but very, very much the exception in running. In that, if you talk to most people from some other sporting background, doesn't matter whether it's football or whatever, judo or something,
Rugby.
or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, the chances are they'll be thinking in terms of their skills that they train and their conditioning that they train, and maybe their stretching or something other that they train, and so on, and then that all goes into their actual performance on the day. Whereas most runners do tend to think you run and that's it.
Yes, and the odd thing is, even in shorter distance running, people look at other activities as a vital part of their preparation.
Yeah.
Sprinters, middle distance run, probably up to middle distance, people would consider it completely normal having a weights program, plyometrics, stretching, and the rest of it.
Yeah.
But as soon as you go above middle distance, heading like 5, 10k and above, basically all that goes out of the window,
Yeah.
and it's just running only. And then, surprise, surprise, along come the injuries.
Yeah, it's a strange thing. I mean, I tend to look on it a little bit like a diet almost. That everyone's got their favourite foods, things they enjoy the most, or something, and very often they're really good for you. I mean, you like eating cheese, that's great, but you probably don't want cheese for breakfast, cheese for lunch, cheese for dinner, and nothing else in your diet.
I mean, for people that really are out and out runners, they don't want to do anything else at all for whatever reason, I would say, well, I would just do some walking then.
Yeah.
Use that as your recovery, as your cross training.
Yeah.
So it's not, you could even be with a group of friends.
Yeah.
But do some walking
Yes.
as a recovery, as a cross training exercise.
Sure. I mean, just to go back to a point that I was alluding to. I mean, one of the things I find as well with cross training is that whether someone's perhaps because they're injured, or maybe just that they are trying to rest and recover a particular muscle group. Let's say they've worked their legs very, very hard the day before in a tough run. It doesn't automatically mean they can't or shouldn't do any training the next day.
No.
But often you'll get more out of doing different training. So, for example, in terms of cardiovascular fitness, as we all know, a part of running is cardiovascular fitness. It's just not the only part.
Yeah.
But of course, you could go and have a grueling, heavy, high-impact session on your running one day. Really be best advised to avoid repeating that within 24 hours.
Yeah.
But quite possibly you could still go off and push yourself really hard. I don't know, let's say on an elliptical trainer or a rowing machine or something like that, and really train your cardiovascular fitness while still letting your muscles and joints recover.
That's it. I say the way to look at it is that the cross training is enhancing your running.
Yeah.
It's not instead of it. It's a way of enhancing running.
Yeah.
And to help you achieve higher performances whilst you're running.
Yeah.
I think nowadays most people are aware that that they need to recover after doing their running.
Yeah.
They're paying lip service to it, but they're not really actually trying to find out the right balance of hard training and recovery that brings the best results for them.
Sure. I think also there's a worrying trend sometimes for people to view having some minor injury or competing while you have an injury as being some sort of like badge of honour, or not exactly a macho type thing, but a sort of oh yes, I did a marathon on Saturday and 3 of my toenails fell off, but I still went out and did the next one the next day.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'd be ashamed even after a 24-hour race if I had toenails missing.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think the other thing is, people just especially when if you're involved in an endurance sport,
Yeah.
it's almost like assumed that you should always be tired. You're always going down with upper respiratory tract infections. You're always feeling run down and all the rest of it. Well, I think actually no, that is not the way.
Yeah.
Health comes first. If you're healthy, you've got a far better chance of training yourself to perform at a higher level than if you're unhealthy. And I would say that being all continually run down, exhausted and worn out is not how you should feel if you're on a properly designed training program.
Well, absolutely, and it's one of the things. Coming from a martial background with teaching staff, and I've also found the same approach in, say, Chinese styles that I've studied. One of the attitudes is that you train to have energy.
Yeah.
You don't train to deplete all your energy and be exhausted at the end of it.
Of course, you're exhausted after I'm actually on my knees after, sometimes you have to carry me off the treadmill after very hard sessions. But the whole point is, you should be recovering, allow yourself to recover, then repeat it again.
Yeah, yeah. So when you're walking around in normal life, you're not in a state of permanent exhaustion.
No, you shouldn't be. I mean, especially if it's starting to affect. Well, you should know the symptoms yourself. You start becoming irritable.
Yeah.
Probably your nearest and dearest will know, even if you don't.
Yeah.
And no, that's not a sign that you're training hard. It's a sign that you're under recovering, and that you're not going to perform at your best.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if your aim is to achieve the best that you possibly can be, that is not the type of training program to follow, where you're just literally grinding yourself into the dust and in a permanent state of exhaustion and tiredness. No.